Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Kingdom Tales. I'm Father Lee, and together we're reading The Tales of the Restoration by David and Karen Maines. This is the third book in the Kingdom Tales series. When I was 16 years old, I went on a mission trip. It wasn't a very long mission trip. It was only for about a month to a tiny little town in Ireland called Marlin. And while I was there, I had to do a lot of very new things. Some of those things were big things like leading worship services and Bible studies. And some of the things didn't seem like they were big things, like cooking dinner or making sure that we had all of the groceries that we needed for the week, or making sure that we had our schedule planned out for the day. But on the way back from that trip, my plane flight was canceled and I was stuck for 8 hours in an airport in Las Vegas, Nevada. Now, I didn't know anybody who lived in Las Vegas, and it was hours and hours and hours away from my home. And I was there all by myself. I didn't have anybody from the trip that I knew. I was just there. And if that had happened a few weeks earlier, even a couple of weeks earlier, I probably wouldn't have known what to do with myself. But being on that mission trip had been sort of like a test. Not a test to see what I knew, but a test that was training me for doing the kinds of things that I would need to do later on in life, or even just later on that month, or even just later on that trip. Today's story is all about tests. It's called Crossing Alone. A boy, no longer a child and not yet a man, his narrow shoulders hunched against the night air, waited at the edge of the garbage dump for dawn. Little child's time had come to risk crossing, and he was cold. He flexed his fingers. He jogged in place. He tried to ignore the fear flip-flopping in his stomach. Where was the Princess Amanda? Wondered little child. Why was she taking so long? And how did she get the courage to make crossing so often, to go back and forth from Great Park to Bright City? The garbage dump was a dangerous place. Though the enchanted city had been freed by the king from the curse of nightlife, and though the people now lived day lives and called their home Bright City, here, in the awful place of ashes and rotting refuse, the naysayers, the burners, and breakers still hunted. Here, they ambushed crossers who bravely worked for the restoration. At day's end, shadows began to creep out of hidey holes and from behind garbage mounds to breach the city walls and the protection of the ranger surround. To make havoc, these dark ones had to work quickly and with deceits, because in day their powers waned. So they cursed each dawn wake and exulted when sun sleep dimmed the skies. Little child blew on his fingers. He hummed a tune from the great celebration to bolster himself against his own fear. He checked his survival kit. Nose masks to protect against poison air, a silver-handled hatchet for battle, bread and water for one day's journey. Oh, he wished he could be like his older brother. If only he could have fought beside Hero in the War of Great Park, or with the underground fighters in the time of resistance. If only he, too, could have chronicled the sightings of the king. He would have endured being a horrified witness at Burning Place for the glory of having seen the king rise laughing from the ashes in a fiery, rosy wonder. Little child wished he could have danced in the first celebration of the new day rising. But no, he had been too small, and slow growing at that, and assigned to Mercy's care. True, she and he had saved many lost babies in the Great Park nursery. True, too, he had become a skilled baby keeper. But baby keeping had everything to do with kindness and nothing to do with boldness. And the thought of the narrow path through the garbage dump, the idea of pit traps and hidden bogmires, made him long for the song of the tea kettle and the warmth of the fire. He sighed. He just had to face it. He was no hero. Little Child crouched on his haunches and huddled for warmth. It was hard being the younger brother of a brave freedom fighter. He wished he didn't have to make the crossing alone. But the rule determined only those brave enough to make crossing by themselves are ready to work in the restoration with others. In the dim light, he could just make out the words chiseled into the stone arch above the gate at his back. Welcome, all who hunt. At last, day was coming. Tendrils of smoke could be seen curling from the hovels of the No People who hid in the mounds of decaying refuse. Over this desecrated wasteland, a purple line of light jagged between earth and sky like an ominous scar on the coming day. More than anything, more even than his pulsing fear, Little Child wanted to work in the restoration. To the kingdom, he whispered to himself for comfort. To the king. Little Child saw a puff of dust unscrolling far down the narrow path before him. He stood to his feet and narrowed his gaze. A figure, still distant, came to sight. If it was the princess, he would soon hear her laughter. She was of the wind and air, of the liveliness of growing things, of the shining sun and the greening earth. Always she came back to Great Park with gladness, having made the dangerous circuit once again unharmed. Was it Amanda? Yes. Yes, there was the clear laugh. "Elsie!" she called. "Elsie, I'm coming, I'm coming!" Breathlessly, a tall young woman reached Stone Gate entrance, grabbed the boy to stop her flight, and then whirled them both round and round. "Oh, Elsie! Elsie!" She called him by the nickname she herself had given him years before. "Today, you make crossing. I'm so proud of you. All your friends in Bright City can't wait for you to arrive. Hero said to hurry." Despite his fears, Little Child laughed to see her, yet when he tried to talk, his tongue tangled. The moment he had been dreading was upon him. Amanda had crossed at night, risking peril to scout the path. He must return now by himself. Is it a bad crossing today? Is it a particularly bad crossing? The Princess Amanda had stopped her turning. Her hair was wild and fell in wind-tumbled jangles. Her cheeks were flushed and high with color. She wore the royal blue running garments of a restoration worker with the silver insignia of loyalty embroidered high on her left shoulder. On her feet were dusty felt boots. Her eyes sparkled, blue as cornflowers in July sunshine. But at this question, she held the boy at arm's length and looked at him serious. "Elsie, you can't doubt that you are ready. Doubting only makes it worse. Besides, Mercy and Caretaker say you're ready. And Hero's impatient, asking for you every day. I only want to know what I might be facing. Is it a particularly difficult crossing?" Amanda put her arm around the boy's shoulder. She pulled him near to her side, and together they faced the garbage dump. Beyond that, showing gray and sleepy through the morning mist, stood Bright City. "I can only tell you that it's not the most difficult crossing today, but it's not the easiest one either." She dropped her hand from the boy's shoulders and smiled at him directly. Early light was fully upon them. "Hurry now. If it becomes a particularly bad crossing, you'll need the whole day so that you will not be in the wasteland when night comes." "The rules," she demanded. "Repeat to me all Caretaker's crossing rules." Little Child clicked his heels to attention, lifted his chin, and repeated the rules. 1. Stay on the path. Do not take any shortcuts or detours. 2, remember that although you are traveling alone, you are not really alone. 3, use your greatest gift while crossing. 4, the path will always show itself if you wait. 5, only those brave enough to make the crossing alone are ready to work for the restoration with others. Smiling brightly, the princess saluted quickly, then walked towards Stone Gate entrance. The iron gate opened before her. When she was beneath the arch, she called back, "Hurry! Don't delay!" And then she was gone. Littlechild faced the garbage dump. He forced himself toward whatever awful unknowns were ahead. Alone. The path before him led deep into the very heart of the dump. Mounds of rotting garbage were heaped high and stretched far as the eye could see. Ugly black flies gorged on the refuse. Even in early morning, the air felt hot. Piles of cast-off machines and broken things and discarded belongings and moldering cloths made places for dark things to hide. The boy had not gone far before he was out of the sight of the entrance. The polluted air stank in his nostrils. He covered his nose with a breathing mask. As he followed the way round a mountain of disgusting garbage, his heart leaped. Not far, but off the path, was a rusting pickup truck, and sitting in it was an old man who looked exactly like Caretaker. "Elsie," he called. "Elsie, Mercy and I are concerned about you making a crossing alone. Come, I know all the shortcuts. We'll drive the rest of the way together." Oh, Littlechild was glad. He wanted to shout. Now he'd quickly see his friends. He'd have a safe and easy crossing and soon be in Bright City with his brother. He stepped off the path and hurried toward the truck, but a question nagged inside. Would Caretaker break his own rules? Always stay on the path, he had said. No. No. Caretaker would not break his own rules. Littlechild tore himself from his longing for an easy journey, ran back to the path, and raced on as fast as he could. A chilling laugh tripped his going. Ha 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 ha! Looking back, he saw the old man rise, tear off a disguise, and uncover the chalk-white face, the smirking grin of a breaker. Shaking an ugly, knobbed, brutal club over his head, the dark thing laughed again. Ha 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 ha! Littlechild shivered at the sight. He was in for it now. Because of breaking the rule, this, not the most difficult of crossings, was liable to become particularly difficult. Sure enough, somewhere from the middle of the dump, a dull drum began to pound. Boom, boom, boom. The breaker shouted, taunting him. "Ha ha ha! Ah, you stepped off the path! Ha ha!" The drum again. Boom, boom, boom. A signal. Now all the dark things at hidden checkpoints would know he was coming, and that he was weak, and that he could be fooled by deceits. Littlechild's heart pounded hard. He had only started, and already he had almost failed. He bolstered his going by humming the hymn of courage. He was woefully off tune, but the sound of the hymn, even without the words, steadied him a little. Once he struggled, one foot in front of the other, as the minutes slowly turned into hours. By midday high, the wretched place had filled him with despair. He struggled up putrid mountains of refuse that felt like he had been climbing for hours. 5 steps up and a slithering slide back, forward, back, forward. Would he ever get out of here? Little Child looked around. He could see neither Great Park behind him or Bright City before, but he could still hear the drums. He could still remember the haunting laugh of the breaker. Suddenly, a terrible howl stopped him in his slipping tracks. Aroo! Aroo! Cautiously, he crested the top of the garbage mound. He ripped off the nose mask and panted hard from the long climb and looked down. A pack of wild wolves, yapping and slathering, waited below, pacing to and fro across the path. Some lifted on hind legs to peer over the rest, but all the fierce heads were turned up toward him. Overwhelmed with terror, Little Child ducked low, turned to hide, pressed his spine hard against the back ridge of the hill. How could he possibly follow the path through the middle of those wild beasts? He noticed a sign beside him, its letters faded by smoke and weather. Detours, wolves ahead. Then in smaller letters, printed underneath, he could just make out Friends of Crossers Association. A two-headed arrow split in half, pointed to the right and to the left of the path. Aroo! Aroo! The wolves howled. They would tear him apart. They would shred his flesh and swallow him whole, bones and all. The path was clear ahead of him, cutting directly through the pack of wolves. He could see it. But now it was not so clear behind him. If he went back, he might lose his way. What was the true thing to do? He started to scramble along a side detour, terror pushing him with an eager hand. He lost his footing in the ash heap and twisted his knee. He gripped frantically at a protruding bar of iron in the rubbish, slowing his slide. Wait. What was the truth here? What was the truth? The rule. The rule. 1. Do not take any detours or shortcuts. Little Child took the silver-handled workman's hatchet from its survival kit. Holding it before him, he slowly began to inch his way back to the path. The detours were a sore temptation, but taking them, he might lose his way. 5 steps forward, slipping down, forward despite a throbbing knee, sliding again, forward against the fear that pushed him back. He crested the hill for a second time. At the sight of him, the wolves below bayed frantically. Arr, arr, ruff, ruff, ruff. Little Child began to slide stiff-legged down the hill. Beads of sweat glistened on his forehead. The handle of the hatchet felt slick in his palm. Looking behind, he watched small avalanches of falling garbage bury the path. The way to retreat had now completely disappeared. Inching, sliding, he reluctantly went forward, closer, closer. Now a yellow light of hunger showed in the eyes of the yapping wolves. Their lips curled, their teeth bared, froth foamed at their jaws. To the king, he spoke aloud, and the words seemed to come from somewhere inside him. To the kingdom! Strength filled his arm. A surge of power firmed his grip. Though I am traveling alone, I am not really alone, he repeated to himself. Rule 2. And at this moment he remembered he was in the hearts of all who loved him. Suddenly, he wanted a battle. He wanted to howl back as loudly as the wolves. Arr! Arr! Nothing would stop him from serving alongside his older brother. How dare anyone try? Others had made crossing alone before him. He too would do brave acts for the king. Lifting his head in the direction of Bright City, he yelled forth the mighty challenge, to the kingdom, to the king, to the restoration. Enraged at the thought of this motley pack of flea-bitten dogs would try to keep him from the work of the restoration, Little Child charged, scrambling down the hill. Attacking boldly, the boy rushed into the middle of the yapping pack. He planted his feet firmly and with anger began to circle faster and faster, the hatchet before him whacking and hacking its way. Turn and turn, the beast yipped. Turn, turn, they whined. At a signal, they scrambled to flee, their tails tucked between their legs. Yip, 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 yip. Little Child watched them go, amazed at their cowardly retreat. Yes, he lifted his arms and circled in victory, his fists clenched above his head. Yes. He two-stepped a warrior's stamp on the ground. Yes. He beat on his chest. Yes. He was a mighty warrior. Little Child, the solitary victor in the battle of the wolves. Mercy always said, the fear is more in the going than in the doing. Yes. But before he had a moment to savor his victory, a choking darkness descended, an ominous fog that blinded his vision. He could no longer see the path before him. Was it night so soon? Had the battle of the wolves overtaken the afternoon? The drumbeat that he had been hearing all through the crossing began to quicken. Din, 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 din. And he remembered a scene from long ago, from a time before he knew Great Park, when he truly was a little child. Two boys fleeing from Enchanted City. Fa, fa. The death drums pursuing fa, fa, din. Confusing shadows, gray and ominous, lurched at him, bumping him. Fear battered, trapping his breath in his chest. He choked on the stink in the air. His twisted knee hobbled him. He fought for a firm footing. Had nightlife caught him between Great Park and Bright City? Was he now under the enchanter's power? Leering yellow eyes peered out of the dark. Here, there, something caught at his jacket, held. He jerked free. Voices whispered close, whispered dread. Nay, nay, nay. Too late, too long. You are ours. Day is gone. The sound of the naysayer's chorus stabbed a cold streak of terror between Little Child's shoulder blades. Nay, nay, nay. Ours, ours, ours. Wait. Wait a moment. Think. Think. Rule 3. Use your greatest gift when crossing. What was his greatest gift? Mercy always said he had the gift of truth. Truth. So, what was the truth of the matter here? The truth was the sun was mid-high when he mounted the hill. The truth was the battle could have only taken a few moments. Little Child opened his survival kit. The doom drum sounded closer, sounded faster. Fa, din, 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 din. He felt for the loaf of bread, broke off a morsel, and ate it for strength, drank some water from the jug. He breathed deeply. Slightly calmer, he grasped the silver handle of the hatchet tightly. Not to doubt, not to doubt. This way, that way. Where was the path? Was he still on it? Which direction was Bright City? Rule 4. The path will always show itself to you if you wait. He held the cool blade of the hatchet to his brow and bent his head. He closed his eyes. What exactly was the truth here? The truth was that he had won the battle of the wolves. They had fled before him. The truth was it couldn't be night already. Wait, he said to himself, wait just a little. A silence descended, more terrible than the night and the noises. And then a voice, cold, ill. You are mine. You are all mine. The enchanter. Little Child lifted his head from the blade. His hand trembled. What was the truth here? Did he belong to the enchanter? No. No. Mercy and Caretaker called him their own. He would not doubt. "I'm a king's man," he shouted. A shriek of terror tore the dark and the silence and the stench. "Ah! You're mine! All mine!" Little Child's knees buckled, but he held the hatchet above his head and shouted back, "You lie! I'm a king's man, and I keep the king's ways." And the voice answered back, "Mine, mine, mine." But it seemed weaker, fading farther away. "King's man!" Who said that, he wondered. These were new voices. "Come, king's man, you're almost here." The darkness shifted. Wait, what was that? Something shining in... No, something shining beyond the false night. Something ahead of him. It looked like the shape of a city high above. Despite his fear of dark things so near, despite his terror of the evil voice that sought to possess him, Little Child called out, "Bright city! Bright city!" And with each shout, the choking fog of ill faded. With each shout, light became brighter. Above, the sun was at early afterhigh. Little Child could see the path clearly before him. Glancing neither right nor left, he followed, not stopping to rest or to think. Hurrah! A clamor, and then solo voices. "Elsie! Over here! You made it, King's man! You made crossing alone!" The boy lifted his eyes. There, the bright city dazzling in daylight. A watch horn blared. "Crow, crow!" Voices shouted, "Crossing, crossing!" And on the walls and at its opened gate, a crowd of restoration workers waved streamers and yelled, jumping up and down in welcome. And there among them stood a young man, tall and broad-shouldered, his blue dress uniform braided with silver and light flashing off the insignia on his shoulder. Hero, his brother. Hero loped down the path to gather Little Child into his strong embrace. "Ah, lad, I am so proud of you. I'm very proud of you. You made it alone." Was it a particularly difficult crossing? More difficult than many, answered the boy, tempted to boast with safety at hand, and then truth reminded him, but not as hard as some, I suppose. After all, he was standing among the most seasoned fighters for the resistance, men and women who really knew the meaning of battle. The two brothers, one tall and muscular, the other slender and limping slightly, walked together to the gates of the city. Hero flung his arm around the boy's shoulders. "Welcome, welcome. You made crossing alone, and now you are worthy to work in the restoration. And how we need you, truth teller. How we need you." They faced each other before entering the watch gates. They clasped wrists in the ranger clasp. The watch cried out the old familiar shout, "The kingdom comes!" This cry of greeting echoed from post to post along the ranger surround that circled the wall of Bright City. "The kingdom comes! The kingdom comes! The kingdom comes!" And never was there a little child more glad to receive a hero's welcome, or to come at last to the safe place where the end of the crossing is also the beginning of the rest of the way.